The sweat ran in cold rivers down my back, despite the sweltering Hollywood Hills night. This wasn't the sweat of honest labor. This was a thief's sweat. The irony was, I was breaking into my own house, stealing the only things in the world that were truly mine. My garage, a minimalist space of concrete and glass I had designed myself, now felt like a surgical theater under the harsh LED lights. Four men brothers I'd chosen not by blood moved in silence. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The only sounds were the soft squeak of rubber tires on the epoxy floor and the muffled clank of metal. We were performing a reverse heist. First went the 1971 Norton Commando, Maria, who could read an engine like a psychic. Reed's minds guided it gently up the ramp of the waiting, unmarked transport truck. I'd bought it with the last of the money in my account in 2008, when the financial world was imploding and my fledgling architecture firm was weeks from bankruptcy. Its roar was the only thing that kept me sane during those sleepless nights. Next, Jackson, whose hands could resurrect dead metal, maneuvered the 1925 Broke Superior SS-100. It was a monster of chrome and leather, a relic from a bygone era. I'd won it at auction after designing the Dubai skyscraper, a project that nearly killed me, but put my name on the global map. 10 bikes. 10 chapters of my life, written in motor oil and steel. A collection worth $2 million, but their true value was immeasurable. They were trophies, scars, vows, and now they were disappearing into the dark. The scrape of my boot on the concrete threw me back 3 nights ago to my parents' suffocating living room in Pasadena. The air was thick with the smell of old grudges and my mother's pot roast. They called it a family meeting. I knew it was an ambush. My younger sister Chloe sat nestled between them on the floral sofa, her eyes shining with the zealous light of a new convert. And in a way she was. "Ethan, I found my path," she said, her voice trembling with a well-rehearsed emotion. She pushed a glossy brochure across the coffee table. The Ojai Energetic Healing Retreat. I didn't even have to open it. Chloe had more paths than a highway map pet photographer, kombucha influencer, crystal jewelry designer. Each one was funded by loans from our parents. Money I knew came from their dwindling retirement fund. My father David cleared his throat, donning the gravitas of a man who always believed he was the smartest person in the room. "This is a real business opportunity, Ethan. An established property. Chloe has the vision to make it something special." "Special how?" I asked, my voice dry. "I'm going to create a holistic healing space." Chloe jumped in the words, spilling out as if learned from a podcast. "Where people can reconnect with their authentic selves through cacao ceremonies and Reiki therapy. It's going to change lives." My mother Helen, a master of turning manipulation into motherly love, placed her hand on mine. "Sweetheart, your sister has a gift. You've always been the practical one, the builder. She's the healer." That comparison, the neat division of our roles, me, the successful worker bee, she, the delicate muse, had always been their way of rationalizing her irresponsibility. "What's the price tag on this gift?" I asked flatly. My father met my gaze, his unwavering. "We've worked it out," he said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "You'll sell the collection." The air seemed to vanish from the room. I stared at him, then my mother, then Chloe. None of them flinched. They weren't joking. They had discussed this. They had planned. They had decided the fate of 20 years of my life without me. For a moment I didn't feel anger. I felt a dizzying emptiness, as if I were looking at strangers. These people who were supposed to know me best looked at my labor, my passion, my sleepless nights, the risks I'd taken, and all they saw was an ATM. "No," I said. The single word fell into the silence like a stone. And then all hell broke loose. My mother's tears. "How can you be so selfish? This is your sister." My father's anger. "You've changed, Ethan. The money has made you hard. You've forgotten what family means." And worst of all, Chloe's innocent indignation. "This is my dream. Why would you want to crush my dream? They're just motorcycles." Just motorcycles. That was the line. That was the sentence that ended it. It burned the final bridge. Now in the cold garage, Jackson put a hand on my shoulder. Last one, Ethan. The 1948 Vincent Black Shadow. It wasn't the most expensive, but it was priceless. My grandfather had left it to me. We'd restored it together in the final months of his life, his hands swollen with arthritis, teaching my young ones how to feel the pulse of an engine. Don't ever let anyone tell you the value of what you've built with your own two hands. He had told me, his voice a gravelly whisper. I nodded at Jackson, unable to trust my voice. I pushed the Vincent up the ramp myself. The cold metal under my hands felt like a final goodbye. The truck door slammed shut, the sound echoing in the empty space, a final period on a chapter of my life. The truck rolled down the driveway, its taillights two receding red dots that vanished into the night. I stood alone in the silence of the garage. It was no longer a temple. It was a crime scene. But I wasn't the victim. They had mistaken my patience for weakness. They had mistaken my love for a blank check. They had started this war with an unreasonable demand. I would end it on my terms, and they would never see it coming. The Los Angeles sunrise is a beautiful lie. It promises a fresh, clean start, painting over the smog in hues of pink and orange. The morning after the heist, I sat in my top-floor office watching the city wake and felt that lie in my bones. There were no fresh starts, only the inevitable continuation of last night's war. The empty garage was a ghost in my mind. I'd driven my daily driver, an old Ford pickup, to the office before the sun was up, needing the distraction of work, the order of blueprints and straight lines. The storm hit at 9:04 a.m. The caller ID on my desk phone flashed, Dad. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep centering breath, and picked up. Where are they? No hello, no preamble. His voice was a controlled growl. Good morning to you too, Dad. I said, my voice as cool and flat as a pane of glass. Don't play games with me, Ethan. I was just at your house. The garage is empty. I'm asking you one more time, where are the motorcycles? The audacity of it. I was just at your house. As if he had the right. As if showing up unannounced to continue his ambush was the most normal thing in the world. They're somewhere safe, I replied. Somewhere their future will be decided by me and me alone. Safe from what, your family? He roared, his control shattering. You're acting like we're a bunch of criminals. When people try to force someone to liquidate their assets to fund a failing business venture, the word criminal isn't that far off, I said. I heard a muffled gasp on the other end of the line. I had said the unsayable. I had called their actions what they were. I am your father, he yelled. We were trying to help your sister. Something you, with all your success, seem incapable of doing. I've helped. For years. I've paid off her credit cards, covered her rent, bailed her out. I'm done cleaning up her messes. And I'm done with everyone treating my life's work as the family slush fund. Silence. A heavy, shocked silence. I had broken the script. I had refused to play the part of the successful yet guilty son. You're going to regret this, Ethan. He said, his voice now ice cold. You are tearing this family apart. Then he hung up. I placed the receiver down, my hand shaking slightly. That was just the first volley. The next call came 15 minutes later. Mom. I steeled myself. Ethan, her voice broke into an immediate sob. How could you do this to us? Your father just called me. He's devastated. You're breaking his heart. I'm just protecting what's mine, Mom, I said, keeping my voice even. Emotion was her weapon, and I wouldn't hand it to her. But it's not just yours, is it, sweetheart? She cooed, a technique she'd perfected over years. Family is about sharing, about sacrifice. We sacrificed for you, made sure you had the best education. I paid off my own student loans. I cut in, a fact they always conveniently ignored. And sacrifice isn't a one-way street. You're asking me to burn 20 years of my life for Chloe's latest whim. That's not sacrifice. That's demolition. But it's her dream, she cried. You've had your dream, your buildings, your firm. Why can't you let her have hers? Because you have to build your own dreams, Mom. You don't get to demand other people give up theirs to buy you a new one. She dissolved into full-blown sobs, theatrical, targeted wails designed to pierce any defense. "I don't know where we went wrong with you," she wept. "I don't recognize you anymore." She hung up, leaving her crying ringing in my ear. Then came Chloe. She didn't call. She detonated. My cell phone began to vibrate with a string of texts, each one a digital dagger. "What did you do?" "Mom and Dad just called. You are a selfish monster. You've ruined my life. I hope you're happy with your pieces of metal. I hate you. I hate you. I hate you." And then the final text, the one that changed everything. "Dad says we can sue you, that the bikes are morally family property. Cynthia's lawyer will be in touch." I stared at that text. The naivety and entitlement in it were breathtaking. They were escalating from emotional pressure to legal threats. They had convinced themselves that their desire somehow created a legitimate claim. True to her word. 2 days later, a courier-delivered letter arrived at my office. It was on the heavy, expensive letterhead of a Beverly Hills law firm. The language was a bizarre mix of thinly veiled legal threats and sentimental family platitudes. It spoke of familial fiduciary duty, implied communal assets, and demanded the immediate return of the wrongfully removed property. It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever read, and the most frightening. It meant they weren't going to stop. They actually believed they were in the right. I picked up the phone and called Marcus, my lawyer, and one of the few people on the planet I trusted completely. "Marcus," I said after sending him a scan of the letter, "I've got a problem." He called back 5 minutes later. I could hear the grim amusement in his voice. "Ethan, this is a magnificent work of fiction. Familial fiduciary duty. That's not even a real legal concept. They're throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. So I shouldn't be worried. Legally, no. They don't have a leg to stand on. But personally, yes. This shows they've gone completely off the deep end. They're willing to destroy their relationship with you over this delusion. You did the right thing moving those bikes." That night I went back to my house. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight to the garage and opened the door. In the dim moonlight filtering through the windows, the empty space seemed even bigger, more silent. The oil stains on the floor were the only ghosts of what had been. I had expected to feel a profound sadness, a loss, but I didn't. Standing in the emptiness I had created, I felt something else. A cold, hard clarity. They thought this was about motorcycles. They were wrong. This was about respect. It was about drawing a line in concrete and steel and saying, "This part of my life is not for you to consume." The war wasn't over. That letter was just the opening shot. But they didn't know that I had spent my life building things designed to withstand storms, and my family had just made themselves a Category 5. The letter from my lawyer Marcus was a masterpiece of cold restraint. It was devoid of emotion. It was a legal brick wall built with indisputable facts and mortared with subtly veiled threats. It stated in no uncertain terms that the 10 motorcycles were the sole property of Ethan Thorpe, purchased with his own funds and registered in his name only. It dismissed the concepts of implied communal assets as having no basis in law. It politely informed them that my father, David Thorpe, appearing at my home uninvited could be considered trespassing, and any future attempts would be dealt with accordingly. The final paragraph was a steel fist in a velvet glove. Any further attempts to lay claim to our client's property or to contact our client in a harassing manner will compel us to seek legal remedies, including but not limited to a restraining order. Sending that letter felt like pushing the launch button on a missile. There was no going back. I had officially made my family a legal adversary. Part of me was sickened by it, but a larger part felt a strange relief. The boundary was no longer an abstract idea. It was documented on legal letterhead. A strange silence fell after the letter was sent. No angry calls, no tearful texts, no accusatory emails. For 3 days, my world returned to a disturbing normality. I focused on work reviewing the blueprints for a contemporary art museum in Seattle, trying to find peace in the order of lines and angles. But the silence was more unnerving than the screaming. It was the silence of an army regrouping, planning its next attack. That attack came on a Friday afternoon, aimed not at me, but at one of my generals. My phone rang. It was Jackson. "Ethan," he said, his voice lower and more serious than usual. "We've got a problem. Your father and sister just left my shop." My blood ran cold. Jackson's workshop was a sanctuary, a world of engine oil, polished metal, and unspoken trust. For them to go there was a violation. What did they do? "They came sniffing around," Jackson said. At first, Chloe tried to play it sweet. "Hi, Uncle Jackson. We were just in the neighborhood and wanted to say hello." All fake. She's looking around the shop, her eyes darting around like a hawk looking for a mouse. I could picture the scene perfectly. Chloe with her practiced charm and my father standing behind her attempting to look patriarchal. "Then your dad got to the point," Jackson continued. He said, "Jackson, we know you and Ethan are close. We're just worried about him. Moving the bike so suddenly, we just want to make sure they're stored safely." "What did you say?" I asked, my grip tightening on a pen. I told him my relationships with my clients are confidential. Then your dad switched tactics. No more Mr. Concerned. He said, "Look, those bikes are family assets. Ethan's not thinking straight. We need to know where they are for legal reasons." He actually used the words family assets. Their audacity was unbelievable. Even after Marcus's letter, they were clinging to that lie. "I told him straight," Jackson said, his voice hardening. "I said, 'David, they're Ethan's bikes. End of story. And now I've got work to do.'" I turned my back on them and started working on a carburetor. "Did they leave?" "Not right away," Jackson sighed. That's when Chloe turned on the waterworks. "Please, Uncle Jackson," she says, her voice starting to tremble. "This is about my dream. Ethan's just being stubborn. If you just tell us where they are, we can sort this all out as a family." I didn't even look at her. I just said, "I think you both should go now." And then, your dad grabbed her arm and pulled her out. But before he left, he turned back and looked at me. He said, "You're picking the wrong side in this, Jackson." It wasn't an observation. It was a threat. I closed my eyes. They had crossed a new line. Bringing my friends into this, trying to manipulate or intimidate them, changed the game completely. This was no longer a family argument. This was a targeted campaign of harassment. "Thank you, Jack," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you for having my back." "Wasn't even a question," he replied firmly. "Those people have lost their minds. Be careful, Ethan. I don't think they're going to stop here." After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The quiet of my office was a stark contrast to the storm raging in my chest. They had tried to breach my inner circle. They had tried to turn a friend into an informant. Their actions had shown me a stark truth. They didn't see me as a son or a brother anymore. They saw me as an obstacle standing between Chloe and her dream, and they were willing to flatten anything or anyone who stood in their way. I picked up the phone and called Marcus again. "They just went to Jackson's shop," I said as soon as he answered. I recounted the entire story. Marcus listened without interruption. When I was done, he said only 3 words. "Document everything." "What do you mean?" "I mean, start a log. Date, time, incident. Your father's call. Your mother's tears. Chloe's texts. Their lawyer's letter. The visit to Jackson's shop. Document it all. If they keep escalating, we're going to need a detailed record of their harassment. That restraining order I mentioned in the letter, it might become a reality sooner than we think." When I hung up, I opened a new document on my computer. I typed the date and started writing. It felt strange chronicling the implosion of my own family, as if it were the minutes of a business meeting. But Marcus was right. This wasn't about feelings anymore. This was about evidence. They had probed my territory. They had tested the loyalty of my friends. They had failed. But I knew they wouldn't give up. They would just find another route, another weakness to attack. And I needed to be ready for it. The war for the motorcycles had ended the night I moved them. The war for my life had just begun. My log began to grow at an alarming rate. It was no longer just a document. It was becoming a chronicle of insanity. Tuesday 10:16 a.m. Call from Aunt Karen, Mom's sister. Started with false pleasantries about work, then pivoted to, "Your mother is just beside herself, Ethan. Maybe you should reconsider. Sometimes we have to do things we don't want to for family." When I politely declined to discuss it, her voice turned cold. "Pride won't keep you warm at night." Wednesday, 2:30 p.m. Email from Uncle Mark. Dad's brother, a stockbroker who had always been dismissive of my career. Subject, a perspective on assets. The body was a long lecture on portfolio diversification and the foolishness of having so much capital lying dormant in non-performing assets like old motorcycles. He ended with, "Selling isn't just a family move. It's the sound financial decision." Thursday. All day, a barrage of texts from cousins I barely spoke to, all echoing the same message: family first. "Chloe needs your help. Don't be so selfish." It was clear my parents had launched a coordinated campaign. They had weaponized the entire extended family, turning holiday parties and birthday calls into a network of pressure. Every call, every text, was a small jab designed to wear me down, to make me doubt my own judgment, to make me feel isolated. The isolation almost worked. I started screening my calls, ignoring texts. My world shrank to my office, my empty house, and the few close friends I trusted. The wall I was building grew higher. But the next attack breached every wall. It was aimed at my most vulnerable point, my professional reputation. The following Monday, I got a call from Sarah, a project lead at our biggest rival architectural firm, a company we were constantly up against for bids. "Ethan," she said, her voice a little awkward, "we need to talk. There's a rumor going around." My stomach clenched. In the world of high-stakes architecture, where $100 million contracts were decided as much on reputation and trust as on talent, rumor was a dangerous word. "What kind of rumor?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, it's a bit odd," she hesitated. "I've heard it from 2 different sources, that you're having some financial difficulties, that you're being forced to liquidate personal assets, and that there's some ugly family dispute over money. People are saying you're under pressure." I felt like someone had sucked the air out of the room. This wasn't a random jab. This was a precise, calibrated strike. Under pressure was our industry's euphemism for unreliable. It implied my judgment might be compromised, that I might make desperate decisions. "Sarah, I can assure you that is completely false," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I believe you, Ethan," she said, and I think she meant it. "But you know how this business is. Mud doesn't have to be true to stick. Someone is deliberately trying to damage you. Watch your back." After I hung up, I sat motionless, staring at the city skyline I had helped to shape. I knew exactly who had done this. Only one person knew enough of the details to craft such a convincing lie, and had the malice to spread it. My father. He had spent his life in the business world, playing golf with executives and attending charity galas. He knew exactly which whispers could kill a career. He couldn't win the war head-on, so he had started a guerrilla war. He was trying to burn down my professional world to force me out of my bunker. The cruelty of it almost took my breath away. This was no longer about Chloe or her dream. This was about punishment. This was about his inability to accept my no, and trying to destroy everything I had built in retaliation. That night I drove aimlessly for hours. I needed to think. I passed the buildings I had designed, structures of steel and glass, reaching for the night sky symbols of everything I had worked for. And for the first time, I felt a real fear. Not the fear of losing the motorcycles, they were safe. The fear of losing everything else. They had me surrounded. They had cut me off from my family. They were trying to poison my professional relationships. They had turned me into an island. I parked on a turnout on Mulholland Drive, looking down at the glittering carpet of Los Angeles. I had a choice. I could surrender. Sell the bikes, give them the money, buy a false peace, and spend the rest of my life living with the simmering bitterness and resentment. Or I could fight back. I had spent my life building things. Bridges, buildings, a company. I understood foundations and structures, and I realized that the foundation of my family had been rotten for a long time. It wasn't built on respect and love, but on obligation, guilt, and control. My father had started a war on my territory. He thought he knew the rules, but he didn't. He had underestimated me. He had underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect the life I had built. I pulled out my phone. The screen glowed in the darkness of the car. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't call Jackson. I opened an app I never thought I would need. I started searching for private investigators. If my father wanted to play dirty, fine. But he was about to find out that I didn't just know how to build things. I also knew how to tear them down. And I was going to start with the false world he had built around himself. The siege was tightening. It was time to break it. Frank Miller was not what I expected. In my mind, private investigators were shadowy figures out of an old noir film clad in trench coats and fueled by coffee and cigarettes. Frank was the opposite. He had an office in a sleek Century City glass tower, wore a perfectly tailored suit, and looked more like a financial analyst than a gumshoe. But when he started speaking, the sharpness in his eyes and the precision of his words told me the polished exterior was just camouflage for a razor-sharp mind. "So, Mr. Thorpe," Frank said after I'd finished the story from the ambush at my parents' house to the industry rumors, "let's be clear. You don't want dirt for a smear campaign. You want leverage. There's a difference." "Exactly," I confirmed. "My father operates in a world built on image and reputation, church board, member, country club, regular, respected pillar of the community. He's trying to destroy my reputation. I want to show him that's a game two can play. I want him to know that I have the ability to destroy the image he's spent a lifetime building. I don't necessarily have to do it, but he needs to know that I can." Frank nodded slowly, his fingers steepled on his polished mahogany desk. "A sound strategy. Deterrence through the capacity for retaliation. Do you have any reason to believe there's anything to find?" I hesitated. "I don't know. My father is a very private, very controlled man. His life seems suspiciously perfect. I just have a feeling that anyone who tries that hard to maintain a perfect facade is hiding something." "They usually are," Frank agreed. "All right, Mr. Thorpe. I'll start a full background investigation. Finances, business associations, public records. I'll be discreet. Your father will know nothing until you decide to let him know." Leaving Frank's office, I felt a strange mix of guilt and empowerment. I had just paid a stranger to dig into my own father's life. It was a betrayal on some level, but it was also the only necessary act of self-defense I had left. Over the next week, while Frank did his work, I focused on shoring up my own defenses. I proactively called key clients and industry partners. I didn't get into the messy details. I just said there was a personal family dispute going on and that disgruntled individuals might be trying to spread misinformation. I assured them that my firm's financial and professional stability was unshakable. It was a risky strategy. It acknowledged a problem, but it was better than letting the rumors fester unchecked. Most people were surprisingly understanding. Complicated families, it turned out, were a universal experience. Meanwhile, the home front remained a cold war. No direct contact, but I knew they were watching. On a Wednesday evening, as I was driving home, I noticed a familiar car, my father's black Lexus, parked at the end of my street. He was just sitting there in the dark, watching my house. He made no attempt to approach me. He just wanted me to know he was there. It was a pure act of psychological intimidation. I took a time-stamped photo and sent it to Marcus, adding it to my growing log. The call from Frank came a week and a half later. "I think you should come to the office." His voice was unreadable. "There are a few things I think you'll want to see." When I arrived, Frank wasted no time. He pushed a thin file across the desk. "On the surface, your father is exactly who he appears to be. Finances are stable, no shady business partners, no criminal record. A model citizen. I felt a flash of disappointment. However, Frank continued, I dug a little deeper into property records, specifically transactions over the last decade. He pointed to a line item in the report. It was a real estate deal from 7 years prior. David Thorpe had sold a small commercial lot in the suburbs of the San Fernando Valley. The buyer was listed as an LLC called Serenity Holdings LLC. Nothing unusual there, Frank said, until you look at who's behind the LLC. He flipped to another page. It was a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for Serenity Holdings LLC. The registered agent was a name I didn't recognize, but the sole manager, the ultimate beneficiary, was listed as a name that made the blood freeze in my veins. Cynthia Martin. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Cynthia, the business broker, the woman in the expensive suit who had sat on my parents' sofa, who had pitched the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in Ojai. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice hoarse. My father sold a property to the woman who is brokering the purchase of Chloe's retreat. It's more than that, Frank said, his voice still even. According to bank records, I was able to access legally through public sources related to the mortgage Serenity Holdings overpaid for that lot, by about 30% of its market value. It was a very good deal for your father. I stared at the documents, my brain struggling to connect the pieces. It made no sense, and then suddenly it made a terrible, perfect kind of sense. It wasn't a business deal, I said softly, the realization washing over me like a cold wave. It was a setup. Frank nodded. It would appear so. Cynthia Martin did your father a very generous favor. Now it seems he's trying to repay that favor by pressuring you to finance a deal she's brokering. The truth of it was sickening. The ambush, the talk of family, of sacrifice. It was all a charade. It was a dirty business deal disguised as a family crisis. My father wasn't just trying to help Chloe. He was trying to pay off a business debt with my money. The betrayal was so deep, so calculated, it made me feel nauseous. Is there more? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Frank pushed a manila envelope across the desk. This is a more sensitive matter. During the financial deep dive, I discovered regular payments from one of your father's investment accounts. Same amount on the 15th of every month for the last 4 years. I opened the envelope. Inside was a bank statement and a single photograph. The photo was taken from a distance slightly grainy but unmistakable. It was my father sitting on a park bench. Beside him was a woman I had never seen before, and running on the grass in front of them was a little boy of about 3 or 4 with blonde hair and my father's exact eyes. At the bottom of the statement, the recipient of the monthly payments was clearly listed, the same name as the woman in the photo. The memo line was a single word: support. The room began to spin. Pandora's box had been opened, and inside weren't just shady business secrets. It was the complete fracturing of everything I thought I knew about the man who raised me. My father, the pillar of the church, the faithful husband, the moralizing patriarch, had another family, another son. The betrayal of my mother was staggering, but for me in that moment the truth had another meaning. It explained everything. His desperation, his recklessness. He wasn't just paying back Cynthia. He was bleeding money. He needed this Ojai deal to happen not for Chloe but for himself. I thought I was in a war over motorcycles. I was wrong. I was in the middle of the collapse of an empire built on lies, and I was holding the tools to tear it down myself. I left Frank Miller's office in a daze. The documents in my briefcase felt as heavy as lead, not from the weight of the paper and from the weight of the lies they represented. I didn't drive back to the office. I didn't drive home. I drove up the Pacific Coast Highway, letting the roar of the ocean fill the screaming silence in my head. A second family. Another son. A secret life funded by lectures on morality and family duty. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. My father, the man who had accused me of tearing the family apart, had been living a double life that could irrevocably shatter its very foundation. The initial shock slowly gave way to a cold, ruthless clarity. I had wanted leverage. I now possessed a weapon of mass destruction. The question was, should I use it? I parked at an overlook watching the waves crash against the rocks below. A part of me, the angry, betrayed part, wanted to burn it all down. I could send a copy of those documents to my mother. I could expose his secret to the world. I could ruin him personally and socially. The fallout would be catastrophic, and for a dark moment I savored the thought. It would be the ultimate revenge. But then the image of my mother's face came into my mind, manipulative and pressuring, as she had been. She was also a victim in this. To destroy my father would be to destroy her too. It would destroy the version of her marriage of her life that she had believed in for over 40 years. Could I bring myself to hurt her that badly? And Chloe? Her cluelessness was a weapon my parents had handed her, but she was still my sister. She would be caught in the firestorm and incinerated. No. A public destructive strike would cause too much collateral damage. My goal wasn't to annihilate my family, but to free myself from its toxic control. I didn't need a nuclear bomb. I needed a silver bullet. A single well-aimed shot that would end this war once and for all. I turned the car around and drove straight to Pasadena. I didn't call ahead. I knew if I did, he'd refuse to see me or erect a wall of defenses. I needed the element of surprise. As I pulled up to my childhood home, my heart was pounding in my chest. This was the endgame. After today, there was no going back. My mother answered the door, her face a mask of surprise that quickly shifted to wary suspicion. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "I need to speak to Dad. Alone." I said, my tone allowing for no argument. "Is he home?" She hesitated, looking at me as if I were a dangerous stranger. "He's in his study." I walked past her down the familiar hallway. The smell of the house, a mix of furniture polish and lingering roast, had once been the scent of comfort. Now it smelled of deceit. The door to his study was ajar. He was sitting behind his heavy oak desk looking at some papers. He looked up as I entered, and annoyance flashed across his face. "What is this, Ethan? Your mother told you we have nothing to say." "We do." I interrupted, closing the door behind me. I put my briefcase on his desk and opened it. I didn't pull out the photo or the bank statements. I took out the documents relating to Serenity Holdings, LLC. I pushed them across the desk toward him. "Serenity Holdings," I said. "Sound familiar?" He looked at the papers, and for the first time I saw his composure crack. A faint gray color spread beneath his tan. He said nothing. "7 years ago, you sold a piece of land to a shell corporation run by Cynthia Martin." I continued, keeping my voice cool and objective, like I was presenting a blueprint. "She paid you 30% over market value. A very sweet deal. And now you're trying to coerce me into using $2 million of my money to finance a deal she's brokering. What do you call that? Dad, a coincidence?" He stared at me, his mouth working, but no words coming out. The mask had fallen away. The moral patriarch, the head of the family, was gone. In his place was a cornered, caught man. It was all a lie, wasn't it? I pressed on my voice, rising with a tremor of anger. This whole thing, Chloe's dream, the future of the family, it was all a front so you could pay back Cynthia with my money. You used your own daughter, you used your wife, you used the entire family as pawns in a dirty business deal. "You don't understand." He finally managed, his voice a rasp. "Oh, I think I do," I said, and now I took the manila envelope out of my briefcase. I didn't open it. I just placed it on top of the Serenity Holdings papers. "I also understand you have expenses Mom doesn't know about. Monthly expenses regular as clockwork for the last 4 years. Support, I believe it's called." The last of the color drained from his face. He looked at the envelope as if it were a coiled snake. He knew what was inside. Pure, unadulterated panic flashed in his eyes. "This war is over," I said, my voice now dropping to a deathly whisper. "Right now. You will call Cynthia and tell her the Ojai deal is dead. You will call Chloe and tell her the money is gone. You will call every relative you sicked on me and tell them you were wrong. You will end the rumors about me in the industry. You will never ever again contact me about money, my assets, or any family obligation you've cooked up. You will leave me alone." He just looked at me, stunned, beaten. "And if you don't," I said, tapping one finger on the manila envelope, "then this envelope and everything in it goes to Mom. Do you understand me?" He didn't answer. He just gave a slow, mechanical nod. His eyes were fixed on the envelope, on the unexploded bomb that now sat between us. I backed away, grabbing my briefcase. "I'll know if you're lying," I said from the doorway. "Frank Miller is very good at his job." I walked out of the study, past my mother, who was hovering nervously in the hall without a word, and out of the house I grew up in. As the door closed behind me, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel glad. I just felt a profound, aching emptiness. I had won. I had ended the war. But to do it, I had to destroy the image of the father I'd carried my entire life. And that was a price I would be paying for a very long time. The drive back from Pasadena was like moving through a foreign country. The familiar streets, the houses I'd seen 1,000 times, all looked different, distorted through the lens of the truth I had just unearthed. The world kept turning, but mine had fractured. There was no elation, no satisfaction of victory, just a cold hollowness, a space where respect for my father used to be. I thought I'd been fighting for motorcycles for my independence, but in the end, I had been fighting a war I didn't even know existed, and winning felt exactly like losing. His surrender was swift and absolute, like the collapse of a building whose foundations had been dynamited. The first call came that evening, just 2 hours after I'd left their house. It was Chloe. Her voice wasn't angry. It was hollowed out, a voice that had been drained of all emotion. "Dad just told me," she said without preamble. "The Ojai deal is off. He said the money isn't there." "I'm sorry, Chloe," I said, and I meant it. As naive and entitled as she had been, she was a pawn in his scheme. "Why?" She asked a simple question that held a universe of hurt. "I don't understand. He was so sure. He said you'd come around." I couldn't tell her the truth. Not now, maybe not ever. To tell her that her dream was just a chess piece in our father's dirty business deal would destroy her. "It's complicated," I said lamely. "It wasn't a good investment. They were just motorcycles," she whispered, repeating the line that had started it all. But this time it held no indignation, only bewilderment. "I thought family was more important than motorcycles." "So did I," said. Then she hung up. The ripple effect continued. 2 days later, Aunt Karen called me. This time there were no accusations. Her voice was confused. "Ethan, your father just called. He apologized. He said there had been a big misunderstanding and that he was wrong to pressure you. Is everything all right?" "It's going to be Aunt Karen," I replied. "Thanks for calling." One by one, the soldiers in his family army received their orders to stand down. The industry rumors stopped cold. Sarah, my competitor, called again to say she'd heard from a mutual acquaintance that David Thorpe had been clearing up some misinformation at the country club. The facade was being repaired. The scandal was being contained. But the silence from the house in Pasadena was the most deafening. My mother didn't call. My father certainly didn't. They had retreated into their own world, bound together by a secret I now held. I imagined their silent dinners, the tense, unspoken conversations about the bomb I had placed on his desk. A week after the confrontation, I went to the storage facility where the bikes were kept. Jackson was already there, polishing a chrome fender on my Norton. "Things seem to have gone quiet," he said, not looking up. "Quiet is one word for it," I said, walking among the dormant machines. They were as beautiful as ever, sculptures of metal and power. But something had changed. The fight to keep them had left an invisible scar on them, on me. "You did what you had to do," Jackson said, finally looking at me. His eyes held no judgment, only understanding. Sometimes to save something, you have to be willing to destroy something else. I sat on the cold leather seat of the Vincent Black Shadow, my grandfather's bike. I rested my hand on the tank, feeling the faint warmth of memory. My grandfather had taught me how to build, how to fix. But he never taught me what to do when the thing that was broken was the people who raised you. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relief. I just felt a profound loneliness. I had won the battle, but I had lost my family, or at least the version of it I thought I had. The ashes of that battle were cold and quiet. I stayed at the warehouse for hours, just sitting among my bikes. Their roars were silenced, just like my family. All that was left was the quiet, and the question of what came next. How do you rebuild from the ashes when you're the one who lit the match, and do you even want to, or is the only choice sometimes to walk away and start over on completely new ground? As I drove away from the warehouse late that night, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? It's me, Chloe's voice. But it was different. It wasn't hollow like before. It wasn't angry either. It was shaky, but underneath the tremor was something new. A faint resolve. I'm at the bus station, she said. I packed a bag. I can't be in that house another minute. The silence. It's too heavy. Can you come get me? The Greyhound station in downtown LA at 10 o'clock at night is its own world. Under the flickering fluorescent lights, weary people sat on hard plastic chairs, each carrying a story of departure or return. And there, sitting on a bench outside next to a single pink suitcase that looked completely out of place, was Chloe. She looked small and lost against the vast city night. The veneer of the energetic healer was gone. No flowing scarves, no crystal jewelry. She was just in jeans and a t-shirt, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, her eyes puffy. For the first time in years, she looked like my sister, not a character she was trying to play. I pulled the pickup to the curb and got out. She looked up as I approached, and for a second, I saw fear in her eyes, the fear that I might say no, that I might leave her there. Thanks for coming, she said softly, her voice hoarse. What are you doing here, Chloe? I asked, my voice gentler than I intended. I'm leaving, she answered, looking at her suitcase as if it held her entire future. I don't know where I'm going. North, maybe? Oregon? I hear it's nice. What are you going to live on? She shrugged a small, defeated gesture. I don't know. Get a job? Wait tables? Whatever. I just know I can't stay there anymore. Ever since that deal fell through, the house is unbearable. Dad doesn't talk. Mom just cries in her room. It's like living in a tomb. Something happened, Ethan. Something worse than you just saying no. She looked at me, her eyes searching for an answer I couldn't give. It was my fault, wasn't it, for pushing so hard about the retreat? I sat down next to her on the cold bench. The smell of bus exhaust and damp concrete surrounded us. No, I said, and it was the truth. It wasn't your fault. You were just caught in the middle. The middle of what? This was the moment. The moment I could tell her everything. About Cynthia Martin. About the setup. About the secret family. I could completely demolish her image of our father and maybe in a selfish act pull her completely over to my side. But looking at her tired, broken face, I couldn't do it. It would be a needless cruelty. She'd been punished enough. The middle of grown-up stuff, Chloe, I said. The middle of old mistakes and bad decisions that had nothing to do with you. She seemed to accept that, perhaps because she was too exhausted to argue. We sat in silence for a moment. Buses arrived and departed, their air brakes hissing and engines rumbling. I was always jealous of you, she said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. You always knew what you wanted. You wanted to build things. And you did. You have your bikes, your firm, your house. It's all yours. I was just always trying on different costumes, hoping one of them would fit. There's nothing wrong with searching, I said. There is if all you ever do is search and never actually do anything, she replied, a flash of bitter self-awareness in her eyes. I thought the retreat was the answer. I thought if I had something big, something important, then I would finally be important. The wreckage of our family was laid bare on that dirty sidewalk, exposed under the harsh streetlights. All my anger at her, my frustration with her entitlement and self-centeredness, it all just evaporated. All that was left was my little sister who was lost and scared. "Don't get on the bus, Chloe," I said. She looked at me surprised. "But where would I go?" "To my place," I said. "The house has a guest room. It doesn't get much use. You can stay there until you figure out your next step. A real step, not a dream bought with someone else's money." Tears started to roll down her cheeks. This time, they weren't tears of manipulation or self-pity. They were tears of relief. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure about anything anymore," I admitted. "But I'm sure you don't belong here." I picked up her pink suitcase. It was surprisingly light, as if she'd left most of her baggage back in Pasadena. As we walked toward my pickup, a bus bound for Oregon roared to life, spewing black smoke into the night air. Its doors hissed shut, and it pulled away carrying a version of Chloe's future that would now never exist. As we drove up the freeway back to the Hollywood Hills, the silence in the cab wasn't awkward. It was a silence of armistice, of shared exhaustion. "Ethan," she said, as we could see the lights of my house on the hillside. "Yeah. About the motorcycles. I get it. I think I get it now." I nodded, my eyes on the road. "I know." We didn't talk about rebuilding. We didn't talk about forgiveness. It was too soon for those words. But as I opened the door to the house I built for my sister, and she stepped inside carrying the pieces of her life in a single pink suitcase, I felt something shift. The silence of the ashes was still there, but for the first time amidst the devastation, a single fragile green shoot was beginning to sprout. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Living with Chloe was like living with a stranger wearing my sister's costume. The first few weeks passed in a careful, cautious quiet. She occupied the guest room, a minimalist space of glass and concrete that overlooked the city and seemed dwarfed by its emptiness. My house, built on principles of clean lines and open space, was the antithesis of our parents' cluttered, knick-knack-filled home. It offered no place to hide emotions. Chloe had few to hide. She was quiet and withdrawn, spending most of her time in her room reading or just staring out the window. The shock of the family's implosion had stripped away her bubbly, often false energy, leaving a stillness that was almost blank. I gave her space. I didn't push her to get a job or figure out her life. I knew that before she could build anything, she needed to grapple with the fact that the foundation she had always stood on, our parents' unconditional and unlimited support, had crumbled. The only call we got from Pasadena came from my mother a week after Chloe moved in. She called Chloe's cell. I was in the kitchen and overheard the tail end of the one-sided conversation. "No, Mom. I'm fine. I just need some time. No, I don't need any money. I'll call you later." When Chloe hung up, she looked pale. "She wanted to send me some money," she said, looking at me like she was confessing a sin. "Dad doesn't know." "And what did you say?" "I said no," she whispered. It was a small moment, but it had the weight of an earthquake. For the first time in her life, Chloe had turned down an easy out. Slowly, she began to emerge from her cocoon. It started with small things around the house: doing the dishes, reorganizing my bookshelves. One afternoon, I came home to find her on my small rooftop garden, pulling weeds with a concentration I had never seen in her before. "I've never really grown anything," she said. Not looking up, her hands covered in dirt. "It's strange. It feels real." A breakthrough came about a month in. I was working late in my home office reviewing blueprints when she knocked on the door. "Can I see?" she asked. I was surprised but pulled up a chair for her. I explained the project I was working on, a new public library for a small coastal town. I showed her how the lines on the paper translated into spaces, how the light would fall through the high windows, how the structure would interact with the surrounding landscape. She listened intently, asking surprisingly intelligent questions. "Why did you put the window there? What does this material feel like to the touch? How are people going to feel when they walk into this space? I never really understood what you did," she said after a long while. "I just thought it was buildings, big boxes, but it's not. It's about creating feelings." Sometimes, I said, when I get it right. The next night she knocked again. This time she had a sketchbook. Can you show me that software again? She asked. And just like that, a new routine began. Every evening she would spend an hour or two in my office. I taught her the basics of AutoCAD. I showed her 3D models. I gave her books on architectural history. She soaked it all up like a dry sponge. It turned out that underneath the layers of energy healer and jewelry designer, there was a sharp mind and a keen eye for space and form. She didn't have the talent of an architect, but she had something else, a deep empathy for how human beings experience a space. She was the one who pointed out that the entrance I'd designed for the library, while architecturally dramatic, might feel intimidating to a child. She sketched out an alternative, a smaller, cozier entry that opened up into the soaring main space, creating a moment of surprise and discovery. It was a good idea, a really good idea, and I used it. Do you want a job? I asked her one evening about 2 months after she'd arrived. Not a handout, a real job. I need an assistant. Someone to organize samples, help prep presentations, work with the interior designers. The pay isn't great, but it's a start. Her eyes widened. Are you serious? I never joke about work, I said. It was the first time I'd seen her truly smile since the night at the bus station. It was a hesitant, uncertain smile, but it was real. Chloe started at my firm the following week. There were whispers, of course. Everyone knew she was my sister, but she worked twice as hard as anyone else to prove herself. She came in early, she stayed late. She did the most boring tasks without complaint. She listened in meetings, taking notes and learning. One afternoon, I was on my way to the storage facility to check on the motorcycles. I hadn't had time to visit since the crisis ended. Can I come? Chloe asked, sounding hesitant. Sure, I said, a little surprised. When we got there, I rolled up the big door. The bikes sat there silent and stately under the industrial lights. Chloe walked inside, moving among them slowly, almost reverently. She didn't touch them. She just looked. She stopped in front of the Vincent Black Shadow. This was Grandpa's, wasn't it? Yeah, I said. She stared at it for a long moment, then she turned to me, and there was an understanding in her eyes that was so profound it stunned me. They're not just motorcycles, she said. They're stories, just like your buildings. Everyone is proof that you were there, you did the thing, you survived. That's why you fought so hard. I nodded, unable to speak. I get it, she said again. And I'm sorry for not getting it sooner. It wasn't a full absolution. The wounds were still too deep for that. But it was a bridge built on new ground, a ground of mutual respect and hard-won understanding. We stood there in silence, two strangers who used to be siblings, surrounded by the steel icons of my past, and for the first time, I felt like there might be a future we could build together. 6 months later, Thanksgiving arrived like an approaching ship that no one on the dock knew quite what to do with. The invitation came via a text from my mother to Chloe, a hesitant offer of a just family dinner. Chloe showed me the text, her eyes uncertain. We don't have to go, I said immediately. There's no obligation. I know, she replied, fidgeting with her phone. But maybe it's time. I didn't want to go. Every cell in my body resisted the idea of sitting at that table in that room and pretending things weren't broken. But then I saw the look on Chloe's face. In the past 6 months, she had rebuilt herself from the ground up. She had moved into her own small apartment, paying her rent with her assistant's salary. She had enrolled in night classes for interior design at UCLA. She had found a quiet confidence, a groundedness I had never seen in her before. And I realized this was her next step to face the past, not as a child who needed rescuing, but as a woman who was her own person. And she didn't want to do it alone. Okay, I said. We'll go. The air in the Pasadena house was thick with unspoken words. My mother hugged us at the door, a hug that was too tight, too long, filled with 6 months of guilt and longing. My father stood back in the hallway, looking older, thinner. His eyes flickered between me and Chloe, holding no anger, just a deep weariness. Dinner was an awkward ballet. My mother and Chloe maintained a strained conversation about Chloe's work or classes. My father and I were silent. We passed the mashed potatoes and the gravy familiar gestures that now felt completely alien. The space between us at that dining table was as wide as an ocean. After dinner, while Chloe was helping my mother clear the table, my father gestured for me to join him in his study. My heart sank. I had thought we might get through the evening without a confrontation. He closed the door. The room was the same, the leather-bound books, the oak desk, but it felt different, like a stage after the play has ended. "There's something I need to show you," he said, his voice low. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a folder. It wasn't legal documents. It was a stack of paperwork from a therapy center. After everything, your mother and I started going to counseling," he said, not meeting my eyes. There were a lot of things that had been buried for a long time. Mistakes. Resentments. He paused, taking a deep breath. I told her. About everything. About the other woman. About the child. I was stunned. I had never anticipated this. The weapon I had used to end the war, I had assumed it would remain a secret between us forever. "Why?" I asked softly. "Because I couldn't live with the lies anymore," he said, and for the first time he looked up at me. In his eyes I didn't see arrogance or anger. I just saw a broken man. "You were right, Ethan. I had turned this family into a performance with me as the director. I failed, as a husband and as a father. Your mother and I, we're trying to figure out if there's anything left to save." He wasn't apologizing, not really. It was more than that. It was a confession, a stark admission of his own failures. I didn't know what to say. There were no words for a moment like this. I just nodded. Before we left, Chloe and I stood in the doorway. My mother gave Chloe a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you, honey," she whispered, and this time the tears in her eyes looked real. As I walked past my father, he put a hand on my shoulder. The touch was light, hesitant. "Take care of your sister," he said. "I always have," I replied. On the drive home, Chloe was quiet. Finally, she said, "Thanks for coming with me." "Of course," I said. "It's what family does." A few weeks later, on a crisp, sunny Saturday morning, Jackson and I oversaw the transport of the motorcycles. This time, there was no secrecy, no darkness. They were moved on an open-bed truck in the bright California sun back to my garage where they belonged. As the last one. The Vincent Black shadow was being lowered. Chloe was there waiting in the driveway. She'd brought coffee and donuts. "Welcome home," she said, smiling. I walked over to the bike, placing my hand on the familiar tank. I had fought a war for it for all of them, and in the process, I had destroyed one thing and accidentally started building another. "You know," I said, looking at Chloe standing there confident and at peace, "I think it's about time this thing got an oil change. You want to learn how—" Her eyes lit up. "I'd love to." I started the Vincent. The engine roared to life, a deep, powerful growl that echoed through the hills. It wasn't the sound of anger or defiance anymore. It was the sound of life. The sound of something that had been lost, but had somehow found its way back. The sound of the roar's return. 190.1's, use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat.